It was a tense evening in the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. President Ibrahim Traoré sat behind his desk, engrossed in confidential documents, deeply focused on an imminent national crisis. The country was facing a serious threat, one that could endanger the government's stability, and every decision needed to be calculated. Ibrahim understood the weight of his position. Any mistake could have catastrophic consequences for the future of the nation. The room was quiet, save for the faint rustle of paper and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Outside, the evening sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the capital city. Ibrahim's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was his assistant, Marie, her face tense and somber. In her hands, she carried a sealed envelope, and as she entered the room, her demeanor revealed the gravity of the situation. "Mr. President," Marie said, her voice low. "This arrived just a few minutes ago. It's urgent." Ibrahim's frown deepened as he reached for the envelope. Inside, he found a detailed intelligence report. His eyes scanned the page, and as he read the names of the individuals involved in the plot to overthrow him, one name stood out, a name that caused his heart to sink. Amadou Diallo. The revelation hit him like a punch in the stomach. Amadou wasn't just a colleague, he was a childhood friend, someone who had been by his side for years, sharing hopes and struggles. They had grown up together in the small town of Bondouila, their bond forged through a shared dream of a better future for Burkina Faso. When Ibrahim took power after the coup d'état, he had trusted Amadou with a strategic position, believing they could work together to rebuild the country. But now, it seemed that Amadou had betrayed him. Ibrahim's gaze lingered on Amadou's name on the report. The disbelief was overwhelming. This couldn't be true, he thought, his mind racing. I can't believe this," Ibrahim muttered, his voice barely a whisper. His hands trembled slightly as he set the report down on the desk. Marie stood quietly, sensing the shock in her boss, but she remained silent, understanding the depth of their friendship and the pain this betrayal must cause him. "Mr. President," Marie spoke again, her voice steady, yet cautious, "what do you want to do? Should we mobilize the security forces?" Ibrahim shook his head slowly, the weight of the decision settling upon him. "No," he said quietly. "I'll handle this myself." Despite the urgency of the situation, Ibrahim knew what he had to do. The betrayal he was facing was personal, and he could not let it unfold in a manner that would only create further division and bloodshed. His decision was clear: he would go to Bobo Dioulasso, where Amadou was allegedly coordinating the coup plotters. Ibrahim would confront his friend face to face, alone, and try to understand what had led him down this path of treachery. His generals and security team voiced their concerns. "Mr. President, this is incredibly dangerous. We don't know how many men we're dealing with," General Caboret warned, his voice filled with concern. "I'm not going to fight," Ibrahim replied calmly, adjusting his military jacket. "I'm going to understand. And if possible, resolve this as a brother, not as an enemy." With that, Ibrahim made the decision to travel alone. His journey to Bobo Dioulasso would be silent, filled with his own thoughts. As he drove, he reflected on his childhood with Amadou, how they had once dreamed of a better future for their country, of a unified Burkina Faso where everyone had an equal opportunity. How could that same man now be plotting against him? It was a question he couldn't answer, but one he was determined to face head-on. The road to Bobo Dioulasso stretched out before Ibrahim, winding through the tranquil countryside. The journey was long, and the tension in the air was thick. Ibrahim's thoughts were a swirling mix of memories and doubts. He had known Amadou for most of his life, long before politics and power had come between them. They had shared hopes, fears, and dreams as children. How could that same man now betray him? How could a friendship so deep turn into an act of treachery? As he neared Bobo Dioulasso, Ibrahim's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. He had made his decision to confront Amadou, to face this crisis head-on. But that didn't make the situation any easier. He had to be careful. This wasn't just a matter of personal betrayal, but one that could impact the future of the country and its people. The sun was beginning to set when Ibrahim finally reached the outskirts of the city. The dusty roads leading to the small house where Amadou had been last seen were dimly lit, casting long shadows across the ground. Ibrahim slowed his car as he approached the familiar area, his mind flashing back to his childhood days in Bobo Dioulasso. The house wasn't much, a simple structure surrounded by trees. It had once been a place of laughter, of late-night conversations about their dreams for Burkina Faso. Now, it felt foreign and distant. He parked his car in front of the house and took a deep breath. He knew that the next few moments would be critical. Would Amadou be the man he once knew? Or had ambition and power changed him beyond recognition? When Ibrahim knocked on the door, it took a few moments before it slowly creaked open. Standing in the doorway was Amadou, dressed in simple, worn clothes. His face registered surprise upon seeing Ibrahim, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Just a cold recognition. "Ibrahim," Amadou said, his voice softer than usual, but still carrying a hint of tension. "What are you doing here?" Ibrahim stood for a moment, looking at his childhood friend. The man who had once shared so many of his dreams was now standing before him as a stranger. "I could ask you the same thing, my brother," Ibrahim replied, his voice calm but filled with a quiet anger that was hard to mask. "Why are you doing this?" Amadou hesitated for a long moment, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, he stepped aside to let Ibrahim in. The room inside was humble, sparsely furnished, with only a few pieces of furniture and some old photos hanging on the walls. Ibrahim's eyes landed on one photo in particular. It was of the two of them, much younger, smiling and carefree. "I know why you're doing this," Ibrahim said, his voice steady. "But you don't have to. We can still fix this." Amadou's expression darkened. He closed the door behind them and sank into a worn chair. "You know, I thought we could make a difference, but look at us now, Ibrahim. The people are suffering. And you're so busy trying to save the country that you forgot to listen to them." Ibrahim's heart sank at Amadou's words. How could his friend think this way? He knew how hard Ibrahim had worked to rebuild the country after the coup. He had poured his heart and soul into making sure the people had better lives, better opportunities. But now, it seemed that all of that had been lost on Amadou. "I never forgot the people, Amadou," Ibrahim replied, his voice filled with frustration. "I grew up among them, just like you. But this isn't the way to help them. Overthrowing the government will only bring chaos. It won't solve anything." Amadou looked down, his face torn with internal conflict. He was a man caught between two worlds, his ideals and the friendship that had once meant everything to him. "I just wanted to help," he murmured, his voice breaking. "But no one listens to me. Not even you." Ibrahim's expression softened. He walked over and sat next to Amadou, placing a hand on his shoulder. "If you want to help, then stand by me. Together, we can do more than any uprising ever could." There was a long silence. Amadou sat still, deep in thought, as tears began to fill his eyes. It was clear that the weight of his actions was finally sinking in. The man who had once been his closest ally, the man who had shared his childhood, was now asking for redemption. "I was wrong," Amadou whispered, his voice full of regret. "But can I still fix this?" Ibrahim nodded slowly. "Yes, my brother. We all make mistakes. The important thing is what we do after we recognize them." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. Ibrahim felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a chance for reconciliation. Maybe the bond they had shared could still be salvaged, and together, they could find a way to fix the wrongs in their country. The drive back to the presidential palace was a quiet one, with Ibrahim lost in deep thought. He had just witnessed the inner turmoil of his old friend, Amadou. The conversation they had shared left a deep mark on him. He couldn't shake the image of Amadou's tear-filled eyes, the shame in his voice when he admitted his mistakes. It had been hard to believe, at first. How could a man who had once been his brother, his closest confidant, betray him like this? But in that moment, Ibrahim understood that Amadou wasn't acting out of malice. He was acting out of desperation, thinking that he was doing what was best for the people. It was a misguided sense of duty, a belief that the only way to bring change was through violence, through rebellion. But Amadou was wrong. Ibrahim had always known that true leadership wasn't about power. It was about understanding, about listening, and above all, about forgiveness. The greatest leaders were those who could unite their people, not divide them. He had learned that lesson from his father, a man who had ruled with both strength and compassion. His father's influence still guided him, even though the old man was long gone. When Ibrahim arrived at the presidential palace, it was late in the evening. The palace, a vast building of gleaming white stone, seemed to stand like a sentinel under the starry sky. But inside, there was a palpable tension. The ministers and generals were waiting for him in the meeting room, their faces grave, their eyes searching his for answers. They knew something had happened during Ibrahim's trip to Bobo Dioulasso, something that had affected him deeply. They were right to be concerned. Ibrahim walked into the room, his demeanor calm but his heart heavy. He had made his decision, but he knew it wouldn't be an easy one to explain. The weight of his role as president pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he also knew that sometimes leadership required personal sacrifice. He had to be true to his beliefs, even if it meant facing the consequences. "Mr. President," General Kabor said, breaking the silence. "What happened in Bobo Dioulasso? Should we arrest the conspirators?" Ibrahim took a deep breath before responding. His voice was steady, but there was a noticeable tightness to it. "Amadou confessed his involvement in the plot," he said, his words deliberate and heavy with emotion. "But he didn't act out of personal ambition. He believed he was helping the people." The room fell silent. The ministers exchanged looks of shock, disbelief. Many had expected Ibrahim to act harshly, to punish Amadou and anyone else involved in the conspiracy. They were waiting for a decision that would align with the harsh realities of politics, not the complexities of friendship and loyalty. But Ibrahim's response was different. He wasn't going to let anger or betrayal cloud his judgment. "I've known Amadou since we were children," Ibrahim continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He was one of the first to believe in me when I had nothing but dreams of changing this country. I can't just dismiss him as an enemy." The Minister of Justice, a stern man known for his pragmatic approach to law, spoke up. "Mr. President," he said, his voice cautious, "this could be seen as a sign of weakness. If you spare Amadou, others may interpret it as an opening for future betrayal." Ibrahim nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. His mind raced as he considered the political implications of his decision. He had always believed in doing what was right, even if it wasn't the easiest path. But was his decision too idealistic? Would others see it as a sign of weakness? He didn't know the answer, but he had to try. "I understand your concerns," Ibrahim said, his voice firm. "But leadership is not just about punishment. It's about righting wrongs, about building bridges. We can't solve our country's problems through violence and retribution. We need to heal, to unite." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. Then he made his decision. Amadou will be removed from his government position and sent to work directly with rural communities, where he can contribute positively to our country's future. The room was silent again, but this time the ministers and generals were processing Ibrahim's decision. Some of them nodded, though there was still a sense of hesitation in the air. Others remained silent, unsure of how to respond. It was a bold decision, and one that would likely have far-reaching consequences. But Ibrahim had made up his mind. He believed in second chances. The following day, Amadou arrived at the palace to receive his new assignment. He was visibly embarrassed, his shoulders hunched as he walked into the room. He had never imagined that it would come to this, being removed from his position in government and sent to work in the rural communities he had once sworn to help. But as he stood before Ibrahim, there was a sense of gratitude in his eyes. He was still a man of pride, but he was also a man who understood the value of redemption. "Ibrahim," Amadou said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I deserve your trust after everything I've done." Ibrahim placed a hand on Amadou's shoulder, his expression softening. "No one is automatically trustworthy, my brother," he said gently. "But everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves again." The days that followed Ibrahim's decision were filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, he felt a sense of relief for having stayed true to his values, choosing forgiveness and redemption over punishment and division. On the other hand, the weight of the decision began to settle on him, as he faced the reality of the consequences it might have on both his presidency and the people of Burkina Faso. As the weeks passed, Ibrahim continued with his routine duties, yet his mind often drifted back to Amadou. The once solid friendship they had shared now lay fractured, but Ibrahim was determined to help Amadou make amends. He knew that his former friend, now assigned to work with rural communities, would need support to rebuild his life and trust in the future. In many ways, this act of redemption was as much for Ibrahim as it was for Amadou. If he could find a way to mend the relationship with his childhood friend, perhaps he could also begin healing the deeper wounds within his country. But not everyone was supportive of Ibrahim's decision. Some ministers and generals still questioned the wisdom of sparing Amadou. They believed that such an act could be perceived as a sign of weakness, a failure to uphold the authority of the president and the government. They argued that the public would see this as a missed opportunity to send a clear message that betrayal would not be tolerated. During a private meeting with his closest advisors, Ibrahim addressed these concerns. He had always valued the opinions of his team, but he also trusted his own instincts when it came to matters of justice. "I understand your concerns," Ibrahim said, his voice steady. "But we cannot lead by fear. If we are to move forward as a country, we must learn to forgive, to build trust again. Leadership is about the future, not the past. If we only focus on punishing mistakes, we will never heal." There was silence in the room as his words hung in the air. Some of the advisors nodded, though reluctantly. They respected Ibrahim, but they were still unsure if his approach would work in the long term. But Ibrahim had made up his mind. He would not be swayed. Meanwhile, Amadou was adjusting to his new life outside of government. He had been sent to work with the rural communities, where he could focus on improving the living conditions of the people who had been neglected for so long. Though it was a humbling experience, Amadou threw himself into the work with determination. He knew that this was his chance to prove that he could still contribute to Burkina Faso, even if it was no longer in the role he had once held. It wasn't easy. The people in the rural villages were skeptical at first. They had heard the rumors about Amadou's involvement in the coup attempt, and many were unwilling to trust him. But slowly, over time, Amadou began to build relationships with the villagers. He listened to their concerns, helped with their daily struggles, and slowly but surely, he began to win their respect. One day, Ibrahim visited a small village just outside of Ouagadougou. The purpose of his visit was to see firsthand how the rural communities were faring, and to speak with the people who had been most affected by the country's political instability. He wanted to understand their needs, their hopes for the future. And so, he walked through the village, talking to farmers, listening to mothers, and meeting the children who were benefiting from the new school programs that had been put in place as part of his administration's efforts to improve education. It was during this visit that Ibrahim met Fatou, a woman who had lost her husband in a previous conflict. She was holding a faded photo of him, her hands trembling as she spoke about her life since his death. "Mr. President," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I just want my children to grow up in peace. We don't need riches, just security." Ibrahim placed a hand on her shoulder, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "You have my word, Fatou," he said gently. "We will do everything we can to ensure your children have the future they deserve." As Ibrahim continued his tour of the village, he couldn't help but be moved by the simplicity and sincerity of the people he encountered. These were the true pillars of Burkina Faso, the ones who built the country with their hands and minds, despite the political struggles that had torn it apart. Later that day, as Ibrahim sat in his car, reflecting on the people he had met, he received a call from Marie, his trusted assistant. "Mr. President," she said, her voice calm yet urgent, "we have an update on Amadou." Ibrahim listened intently as Marie explained that Amadou had been making strides in the rural communities. He had managed to bring together a group of farmers to start a cooperative, helping them sell their crops collectively and improve their livelihoods. Ibrahim felt a sense of pride in Amadou's efforts, knowing that his former friend was slowly earning back the trust of the people. But even as Amadou worked to redeem himself, the country's security concerns remained. Ibrahim knew that there were still forces within the government who would try to undermine his efforts, who would use Amadou's past actions against him. He would have to be vigilant, but he was determined to keep moving forward. The road ahead would be difficult, but Ibrahim was resolute. He believed in the power of forgiveness and redemption. If he could guide Amadou back into the fold, perhaps he could begin to heal the divisions within Burkina Faso. The weeks that followed Ibrahim's decision to spare Amadou were filled with a delicate balance of progress and uncertainty. As the president, Ibrahim continued his mission of rebuilding Burkina Faso, making it clear to his ministers and advisors that leadership was not just about controlling power, but about forging relationships, healing wounds, and trusting the people who were trying to make a difference. However, there was still much work to be done. Amadou, now working in the rural communities, was proving himself day by day. Despite the skepticism and suspicion he faced from the people he was now working to help, he had started to gain their trust. His deep understanding of the hardships they faced, combined with his genuine desire to make things right, allowed him to slowly but surely turn the tide. In the small village of Yako, Amadou organized a small group of farmers to collectively sell their crops and improve their business practices. Though the work was difficult and the rewards modest, the villagers began to notice that his presence was making a real difference. As they started to see positive changes in their lives, they began to soften towards him, realizing that this was a man who was genuinely trying to make amends. In parallel, Ibrahim worked tirelessly to strengthen the country's institutions and foster a sense of unity among the people. One of the core initiatives of his administration was to address the economic disparities that had existed for decades. While he focused on economic stability, he also placed great importance on ensuring that every citizen had access to education and healthcare. He had always believed that true leadership came from listening to the needs of the people, which is why he visited rural villages regularly, learning about the day-to-day struggles of his citizens and trying to implement policies that could alleviate their burdens. One of his most significant moves was to revamp the education system. Ibrahim understood that in order to build a prosperous future for Burkina Faso, the country needed educated and skilled individuals. He worked with the Ministry of Education to establish new programs that focused on teaching young people practical skills that could empower them to succeed in the modern world. This initiative was especially important for young girls in rural areas, where access to education had often been limited. Ibrahim was committed to giving every child, regardless of gender or background, the opportunity to achieve their potential. As Ibrahim's policies began to take effect, the country started to show signs of improvement. Infrastructure projects were being completed on time, and rural communities were benefiting from increased access to education, healthcare, and financial support. Yet, the road was far from smooth. Opposition forces, both within and outside of the government, continued to challenge Ibrahim's leadership. The scars of the coup attempt were still fresh, and many believed that the country's political system needed a complete overhaul. Ibrahim knew that these challenges were inevitable, but he remained focused on his vision for the future. He had learned long ago that true leadership wasn't about appeasing everyone, it was about staying true to one's principles and being willing to make tough decisions for the greater good. The trust he had placed in Amadou, despite his past betrayal, was one of those tough decisions. It was a decision that could have backfired, but Ibrahim believed in the power of redemption and second chances. He knew that Amadou had the potential to make a positive impact on the country, and he was willing to give him that opportunity. Amadou, for his part, was deeply grateful for Ibrahim's faith in him. He knew that he had a long road ahead in proving himself, but he was determined to succeed. He continued to work hard in the rural communities, encouraging young people to take ownership of their future, and building connections with farmers, teachers, and local leaders. As he worked, Amadou began to feel a sense of pride in the work he was doing, and in the knowledge that he was helping to build the future of Burkina Faso, even if it was one small step at a time. One afternoon, Ibrahim visited a remote village in the northeast, where he had promised to meet with a group of farmers who had been particularly vocal about the challenges they faced. As he spoke with them, listening carefully to their concerns and offering solutions, he could see the hope in their eyes. For many of them, this was the first time they had felt truly heard by their government. Ibrahim's presence in these villages, his willingness to engage with the people on a personal level, was not just a political strategy, it was a reflection of his deep belief in the potential of every citizen. That evening, as Ibrahim sat in his office, reflecting on the day's meetings, he received a message from Amadou. It was brief, but the words were significant. Amadou thanked him for his trust, for giving him a second chance, and for showing the people of Burkina Faso that leadership could be about more than power, it could be about kindness and compassion. The message left Ibrahim feeling both proud and humbled. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that he was on the right path. He had made mistakes in his own life, but he had learned from them, just as Amadou was learning from his own. Ibrahim knew that as long as he stayed true to his values, he would continue to lead Burkina Faso toward a brighter future. A few days later, Ibrahim attended a public ceremony in a small village on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The villagers were celebrating the completion of a new school building, funded by the government's new educational initiative. As he watched the children running and playing in the courtyard, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. These children were the future of Burkina Faso, and it was his job to ensure that they had the opportunities they needed to succeed. Later, Ibrahim addressed the crowd, thanking them for their perseverance and dedication to building a better future for their country. He also took a moment to acknowledge the importance of their contributions in making Burkina Faso a better place for everyone. The crowd responded with applause, and for the first time in a long time, Ibrahim felt a sense of unity among the people. As the day drew to a close and Ibrahim returned to his office, he couldn't help but reflect on the long journey he had taken, from the streets of Ouagadougou to the presidential palace, from a country on the brink of collapse to one on the path to renewal. It hadn't been easy, and there was still much work to be done, but he had made progress. And with each step, he was proving that leadership was about more than just power, it was about building bridges, healing wounds, and showing the people that their president cared deeply about their well-being. As he sat back in his chair, Ibrahim allowed himself a moment of peace. The challenges would always be there, but as long as he remained committed to his vision, he knew that he would continue to lead Burkina Faso with integrity, compassion, and unwavering resolve. The country's future was still uncertain, but with the people's support, he knew that anything was possible. The story of Ibrahim and Amadou, of redemption and trust, would be remembered for generations to come as a testament to the power of forgiveness, leadership, and the belief that even the most fractured relationships could be healed for the greater good of the nation.